morning, everyone. Good to see you today. It's hard to watch something upside down. It's hard to read something upside down. That was on purpose, by the way. Our creative team hasn't lost it. They're doing great. But it's even harder to live and function upside down. Several years ago, when they were making the movie Top Gun Maverick, the actors and actresses had to learn how to function upside down. As they were going through their training, Tom Cruise designed this 3-month training, rigorous program. They had to learn how to fly in couple of different aircrafts before they got in the F-18. So they started in this single-engine plane just so they could be used to being in the air. Then they went on to a high-performance training jet. But they had to learn how to use radios, and they had a camera. They had to learn how to operate the camera, so they're like their own producer up there. They had to learn how to do all these things. But before they could get in the F-18, there was one interesting component of the training that might surprise you. They had to go through underwater survival training. The Navy says if you're going to eject from an aircraft, you have to learn how to survive in water. And so I was talking to one of our members about this last week who was in the military. He's a military pilot for a number of years. He's like, yep, every 4 years we had to go through this training. And it's called the helo dunker. This is it right here, this contraption. And inside it mimics an aircraft. So you have a seat and seat belt and there's windows. And they put you in this thing and submerge you underwater and flip you upside down. And then you have to figure out how to get out. Obviously, you're holding your breath and hoping your heartbeat doesn't get too fast and use up all your air. All of that has got to happen pretty quickly. Now, to graduate from this thing, you have to do it blindfolded. Right, Kyle? You do it blindfolded, yep. So you can imagine how difficult this thing would be. You're buckled in, and then they turn you upside down. You have to reorient yourself and think, okay, how do I get out? Where's the window? All of this in just 15 or 30 seconds is what Kyle said. Now, I can imagine that would be incredibly challenging. Living and trying to function and orient yourself while you're upside down is very difficult, and it's just like the Christian life. The Christian life is like trying to live upside down. Let me give you some examples. Jesus says, the last will be first, and the first will be last. Well, everything in the world in our flesh says, I want to be first. Put yourself out there. Promote yourself. How about this one? Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, for you will be sons of your Father who is in heaven. How about that? We naturally want to get even with our enemies. We want revenge. We want them to pay. And Jesus says, no, love them. Pray for them. How about this one? Peter goes to Jesus and says, Lord, if my brother sins against me, how many times do I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Peter's being generous. And Jesus goes, if his brother sins against you, you forgive him 77 times. In other words, there's no limit, Peter. You just keep forgiving. If your brother offends you and comes and asks for forgiveness, you have to forgive him. And that goes totally against our flesh and the world that says, no, you cut them off. You have nothing else to do with them. And Jesus says, no, you forgive them because I've forgiven you. So the Christian life is like living upside down. Our flesh and the world is totally against the teaching of Jesus oftentimes, but yet we are called to follow Jesus Christ. Now I've got one more for you today. Where do we find significance in life? Where do we find it? There's a book published, 20-something years ago called The Search for Significance. And in this book that sold a couple million prints or copies, the author, Robert McGee, says that Christians often find their success or significance in worldly sources, like success at your job and beauty and wealth and status and approval of others. And he says that actually does produce some amount of significance. It just ends really quick. And then it's just this ongoing treadmill. I got to do more. I got to do more. I've got to work for this person's approval. And it's exhausting. And Jesus comes and says, I have a whole different model. If you want to find significance, that's great. I've got a totally different way. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In Mark chapter 10, Jesus has just explained for the 3rd time, he's going to Jerusalem and what is about to happen to him. The first time was in chapter 8. And Jesus said, I'm going to go. He said he's going to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and he's going to be killed. Peter takes him aside and rebukes him. In other words, Jesus, this can't be. How could this happen to you? Well, a little bit later in chapter 9, Jesus said again, the Son of Man, that he should suffer many things and be treated with contempt. And then right after that, actually it's a little bit later in chapter 9, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise. Then it says, but they did not understand the saying. And they were talking about who was going to be the greatest. So this has already happened twice, and it didn't go very well for the disciples. So now Jesus, a third time, in just before the passage that Miss Stacy read, Jesus says, see, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. So if you're reading this for the first time, you think, okay, this is probably not going to go well again. This is a third time, and they haven't gotten it the first 2 times. And you would be right, because that's what happens. So James and John come to Jesus with this request. The brothers, the sons of Zebedee, their brothers. James is probably the older one. That's why he's mentioned first. But I want you to know 3 things about these brothers. First, these guys were decisive. If you go back to Mark chapter 1, Jesus calls them right after he called Simon and Andrew. They left everything and followed Christ. They left their business, they left their dad, they left their future, security, everything to follow Jesus Christ. So these guys were decisive. Second, they were devoted. You probably think of the story in Luke chapter 9 where Jesus calls them sons of thunder, possibly for this reason. In chapter 9, Luke chapter 9, Jesus sent some people ahead of him to prepare this village in Samaria for his arrival. Well, Samaritans want nothing to do with him. And these brothers go, hey, Jesus, you want us to tell God to send fire down from heaven and zap these guys? They had this devotion to Jesus. They wanted Jesus to be honored, to be revered and worshiped, and Samaria was having nothing to do with it. And so God, why don't you just zap them and judge them right now? You have to admire their devotion to Jesus Christ. But thirdly, these guys were determined to have a position of significance. They come to Jesus and they make this request. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever it is that we ask of you. And so Jesus asked them a question. What do you want me to do for you? And by the way, he asked the same question in the very next story that, Lord willing, we'll cover next week. We'll talk about living right side up. Jesus asked blind Bartimaeus, what do you want me to do for you? And he has a totally different response than what these brothers have. So Jesus asked them a question, and Jesus wants them to admit, why are they making this request? He wants to get to their true intentions. And so this first request of James and John, it tells us where the first place we often look for significance, and it's in people. We often search for significance in people. And it's built on a false assumption that I must have an external source to feel significant. My significance must come from somewhere or somebody else. So I've got to find it in people. Now, if I told you, he was not here, but if I just told you, hey, Coach Nick Saban and Miss Terry, they were in the first service. They worshiped with us, so they sat right over here. Some of you would be bummed. You would go, man, why didn't I come to the first service today? Because I would love to just meet Coach, and some of you would go shake his hand. Others of you wouldn't care because you're not Alabama fans. That's fine. But others of you, that would be a big deal for you. Or some of you would go up to him. Others of you would be more discreet, and you'd pull out your phone. You'd do one of these with Coach in the background, but you'd post it later and go, yeah, worship with Coach today. Coach was at Valleydale. He was in the house. And why would we do that? Well, because he's a public figure, and it makes us feel significant that we're associated with a public figure. So several years ago, we were in Nashville, and Courtney used to listen to Dave Ramsey all the time. So we decided to stop by his Ramsey Solutions is what it's called. So we got our picture taken with Dave. Now, why did we do that? Because it made us feel important. We like Dave, and we just thought, hey, Dave's important. He's a public figure. So we all do this. We search for significance in people oftentimes. But there's another place we search for significance, and it's in verse 37. Now James and John provide more detail on their true request. They said to him, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Grant is a verb that just means to give. Jesus, give us these positions of authority. Now, to sit at the right or left, the right hand was where the heir to the throne would sit. And just practically speaking, the right hand is viewed as more powerful than the left. So just for those two reasons, the right was more significant. The left was the second most important place. So Jesus, we want to be your chief advisors when you come into your kingdom. Now, you have to kind of, it's not odd that they would make this request. And here's why. In chapter 9 and verse 1, Jesus said, truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. Okay, so Jesus has said, hey, you're going to see the kingdom. Now, they heard that. Now, and you also have to remember, James and John were part of the inner circle. Remember James, or Peter, James, and John. They were Jesus's inner circle. They were on the Mount of Transfiguration. All the other 9 guys, they didn't get to see that. When Jesus went in Mark chapter 5 to heal Jairus' daughter, the other 9 didn't get to see that, but James, John, and Peter did. So you can, on one hand, you can understand why they would have made this request. Jesus, we're important to you. We matter to you. And if anybody's going to get special treatment, it's going to be us. We were some of the first that you called to follow you. So you can kind of understand why they are making this request of Jesus. Now, what do they have in mind? Is this the wedding supper of the Lamb in Revelation that they're thinking about, where they want these positions? Or is he talking about the judgment of Christ, where Jesus is seated and he's judging the nations? I think that's what he's talking about. Because at a banquet, you would recline. At the judgment, Jesus is sitting. So that's how I interpret it. These guys want to be right there in the ear of Jesus as his chief advisors when all these people are coming before him for Jesus to judge. And they're going to have visibility. They're going to have prominence. They're going to have power. So the second place we often search for significance is in position. We do it. We search for it in people, and we search for it in position. If I can just get this position, I will feel so important. I'll feel like I have arrived. People will respect me. I'll have a title. And the underlying assumption is a title will make me feel significant. So I'm going to be important. This is especially true when we're young or middle-aged. We're driven at times to get this certain position. In 2006, there's a movie that premiered called The Devil Wears Prada. I bet you didn't think you'd talk about that at church today, did you? The Devil Wears Prada. Well, it portrays this young lady named Andrea Sachs, who's played by Anne Hathaway. And she moves to the big city. She moves to New York. She's an aspiring journalist. She wants to be successful, all of that. So she goes to work for Runway Magazine. Runway Magazine would be kind of like Vogue Magazine. It's #1 in the fashion industry, and it's a desirable place for people to work. She goes to work for Miranda Priestley, who is played by Meryl Streep, and she's powerful and has fame, and she's demanding. She's a ruthless boss, all these things. But from a worldly perspective, she has everything. And so Andrea begins to work with her, and she, before long, enjoys dressing nice and enjoying the fast pace of the big city life and all of these things. But because she's working more and more and more, she gets disconnected from those who matter the most to her. Her boyfriend, her family, those who love the most. She no longer really has time for them because she's in this demanding profession. And she has a moment of clarity when they go to Fashion Week in Paris. And while they're there, Andrea learns that Miranda is going to be replaced by somebody else to be the chief editor. So she tries to warn Miranda. So Miranda, in response, really sacrifices the career of a coworker and their friendship with his coworker named Nigel. And Andrea just can't believe it. How could she treat someone like this? How could she, I don't remember what she did, but how could she just totally turn against him like that? And they're in the car, and they're having this conversation. Andrea goes, I can't believe you would do that to Nigel. And Miranda essentially says, hey, if you want to succeed, this is what you have to do. You have to step over people. If you want to keep this position, this is how you have to act. And Andrea says, what if I don't want to live like the way you live? And Miranda says, oh, don't be ridiculous, Andrea. Everybody wants this. Everybody wants to be us. And she puts on her sunglasses, and she smiles, and she steps out of the car. And there's people taking photographs, and everybody wants to be around Miranda. And Andrea just gets out of the car and looks in disgust at this entourage just walking away. And she's thinking, that's what I'm becoming. This is who I'm becoming. This is what position can lead to. And she walks away and just throws her phone, and she's done with that lifestyle, and she moves on to something else. And that's the emptiness of position. When we make that our main focus, if I just get this position, if I could just have it, I will feel so important. But we don't realize who we become in the meantime and who we leave behind in the meantime. And for some of you, this may sound completely foreign because from a young age, you have been driven like you got to make straight A's. You got to be the best. And you've just been a driver and a grinder, and you're grinding through your career, and you're grinding through school, and you're grinding through residency or law school or whatever it is. And we need solid Christians in those fields, by the way. We need you in those careers, but we just don't need you to believe that your significance is going to be found in that position. We need you to serve Jesus Christ. And if he lifts you up in that position, go for it. I know some of you are in demanding professions. You're in coaching, you're in medicine, you're in whatever. We need you there. Just don't expect that position to fulfill you. Expect Jesus Christ to fulfill you. Does that make sense? We need you there. Don't leave. We need you there, but just don't expect it to satisfy you. Okay, our next point is found in verses 38 through 40. Jesus responded to their request with a gentle rebuke. You guys, you don't know what you're asking. You have no clue what you're asking. Now Jesus introduced two different concepts, the cup and the baptism. These are metaphors for suffering. These are metaphors for the suffering that Jesus is about to endure and the suffering that they are going to endure. The cup is often used in Scripture of judgment. It can refer to blessing like it does in Psalm 16, but it oftentimes refers to God's judgment or God's wrath that's coming. So Jesus is talking about drinking the cup means to share in his suffering, to share in the faith that he is going to endure. Baptism is the same way. The word means to dip or to immerse in water. So it means to be submerged or overwhelmed with suffering and hardship and danger and distress, in which Jesus is about to endure on the cross and through his suffering. So he tells them, hey, you will endure this, although not in the same way. These guys are not going to pay for sin like Jesus is. They're not the Son of God and Son of Man like he is, but they will be persecuted. They will suffer. In fact, less than 10 years from when Jesus said this, James is going to be the first Christian martyr. Actually, he's not the first. Stephen was the first. But in Acts chapter 12, he's the first disciple that was killed. Acts chapter 12, verse 2, James is killed by the sword under King Herod. That was in AD 41, so less than 10 years. And then John's going to live for decades. We believe he's the same one that wrote the book of Revelation. So he survived, but he endured exile on the island of Patmos. So Jesus says, you will suffer. Those days are coming, but you're not going to pay for sin like I did. But the positions of authority and honor at his right and left, Jesus says, are not mine to permit. That's not my decision. And the verb, it has been prepared, is in the passive voice, and God is the subject. So God the Father is the one who decides that. So notice Jesus doesn't deny that there are positions of authority or there are positions of prominence. He just says, that's not my call. That's not my decision. So we often search for significance in people, position, but we often do it without success. So disciples at this point, the only thing we know about them is they're frustrated, their selfish ambition. All these requests have only revealed that. So verse 41 is a transition verse in this story, and then we get to the teaching of Jesus in the second part. The transition now it spans back from Jesus, James, and John to the other 10 disciples who have been close by listening. And they're frustrated. It says they were indignant. Now, that word is used earlier in the chapter to refer to this righteous indignation of Jesus when the children were not permitted to come to him. But there's nothing righteous about what the disciples are feeling here. They're jealous and envious and frustrated. These guys beat them to the punch. They had the same thoughts. They had the same selfish ambition. Just these brothers got ahead of them. So they're frustrated. Now imagine how Peter must have felt. Peter was one of the three. And all of a sudden, these two have pushed him out. There's only 2 seats. And I can imagine Peter going, God, I was on the Mount of Transfiguration with you. I was with Jairus' house just like you were. And why didn't you think about me? You've just pushed me out of this whole thing. So they're frustrated that maybe they didn't think about it sooner. But now Jesus calls them together, and now Jesus is going to teach them. Hey, the world has this way of pursuing success and significance, guys, here's how I want you to do it, okay? He begins with you know. You know, which means it's clear, it's evident. Anybody can see it. Anybody who's living can see how the world operates. That those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles, he's thinking of probably the Roman emperors and the Roman governors. They lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. On the Roman currency, the denarius, they had the image of the emperor was on that coin. And so Jesus, perhaps, we're not told, but perhaps he's holding up the coin to say, like, guys, you see this? You see how people lead in the world, how these political leaders rule? They exploit you, they oppress you, they dominate you. And on that coin, it had a phrase, an inscription that said, he who deserves adoration. Maybe he was holding that thing up so they could, oh, yeah, Jesus, we clearly understand that. It's a picture of worldly leadership. Lord it over just means to bring into subjection, to have mastery over someone. To exercise authority means to tyrannize over someone. That's the type of worldly leadership and significance that was evident and just clear for everyone to see in those days. They despised that type of heavy-handed leadership. But Jesus was teaching them, hey guys, this is really who you're becoming. If you don't watch out with this selfish ambition, that's who you're becoming. That's who you're going to turn into. And then verse 33, the first word in that sentence is the word not. It may not be that way in your English, but that's the first word there. And so Jesus is going, not so among you. I know how the world operates, and everybody can clearly see it, but not so with you. And it's in the present tense. So right now, guys, this is not how you function. Not so. But notice he doesn't fuss at them for wanting to be great. He doesn't condemn their desire to want to have a position of significance. He just says, I just want you to do it a different way. We don't operate like the world does. We don't oppress people. We don't dominate people. So, well, how do we do it then? He says, but not so among you, for whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. So 4 key words here: great and first, servant and slave. You want to be great? Hey, that's a great desire. Be a servant. The word is you've heard Pastor talk about this. We get our word deacon from it. So to be a servant is to wait on tables, is what it originally meant. You want to be great? Go serve somebody. Go wait on a table. Go consider someone else more important than you. Go make their desires, make their wishes more important than yours. Jesus said in John 12:26, if anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. Hey, that's a great desire, guys. Just go serve somebody. Then second one is the word slave. Now, both of those words are at the end of their verses. Servant is the last word in 43. Slave is the word doulos. It's in the last word of verse 44 for emphasis. So you want to be first? Be a slave. Go be a slave. Now, at first thought, you may think, oh, servant, slave, like that's the same thing. It's not the same thing. A servant is higher than a slave. A slave is the lowest one could possibly get. It meant complete ownership. It meant you had zero rights. No one would voluntarily become a slave, because a slave only existed to please his or her master. They had no rights. They really had no hope of getting out unless they were released or someone paid for them. And so he's calling them, deny yourselves and become a slave. Put your rights aside. Consider somebody else more important. Consider Jesus your master and serve him. So here's our answer. It's very simple. Significance is found in serving. Guys, you want to be significant? You want to be great? Hey, that's a great desire. Why don't you go serve somebody? Significance is found in serving. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, Barry, what's the connection? I understand that's what the Bible says, but what does that look like in my life? Let me give you just a simple example of someone who served me, even though he had authority over me a number of years ago. This was in 2017, and Courtney had won a trip through work she was doing to Hawaii. So we were thrilled to be able to go to Hawaii child-free, and a lot of it was paid for. We thought, hey, this is great. We couldn't wait. It was in September. And so we had 4 children at the time and began making arrangements. All that was covered. Man, couldn't wait. Well, then Hurricane Irma comes through. And this was in September. So the hurricane comes through. We were scheduled to go right after that. And we had some damage there in Tampa. And then the Red Cross came and set up at our church. So there was a lot going on. I was a local missions pastor. So it's not a good time for a local missions pastor to be gone when you have a hurricane that comes through your town. However, my supervisor didn't say anything, so everything was still set. So we left, and we had a great time. It was a wonderful trip. Well, I found out later that my supervisor, Pastor Ray, he also had a vacation scheduled that same week. And he canceled his vacation in order to do his job and my job and never said a word to me. Never, to this day. Never said a word. Never complained. He had all the authority and every right to come to me and say, hey, I know you're excited about this trip, but I got to have you here. I mean, we just had a hurricane. You got to be here. Never said a word. And I don't even remember how I found out about it because he never told me. And so I started thinking this week, this story came to mind. I thought, I don't even think I ever told him thank you. So I wrote him this week. I just said, hey, I just want to say thank you. And it so impacted me. And I think that's servant leadership. That's just a simple example. But that's someone who has authority over me, who had every right to say, hey, sorry, pal, this is not going to work. But he didn't and never said a word about it. That's what we're talking about. That's putting your desires aside to serve somebody else. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, if I take this position of a servant or slave, are people just going to walk all over me? Are they going to take advantage of me? And that is a fair question. So let me respond by asking you this question. What is the goal of the Christian life? Just think to yourself, what is the goal? What is the bottom line goal of the Christian life? Well, according to Romans 8:29, listen to this. Those whom God foreknew, he also predestined to be what? To be conformed to the image of his Son. So the goal of the Christian life is to become like Jesus Christ, right? Now, we all know we're not going to be there until we see Jesus, whether we die and go to see Jesus or he comes back. But when we see him, we'll be like him. But all along the Christian life, we should be getting closer and closer to Jesus. That is, we learn to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. We learn to be last. We learn to consider others more important. We should be learning and becoming more like Jesus Christ. So, is it possible in doing that others will take advantage of you? Yeah, it is possible. And a lot of them might. But if you're becoming more like Jesus, what does it matter? Your goals become more, my goals become more like Jesus Christ. So if we get wronged in the process, that's okay. We become more like Christ. That's the bigger goal. That's the bigger win. And so now Jesus, in the last verse, and we'll be done, Jesus gives them an example. He's not teaching them to do anything he's not willing to do, anything he's not about to do. He says, in other words, guys, I'm about to give you now the model of this. For even the Son of Man, he's going to tell them what he's going to do and who he came to do it for. The Son of Man is a title that goes back to Daniel chapter 7. It's a title of authority and power. If you read the context in Daniel 7, you have the Ancient of Days, and it says, and one like the Son of Man, and all the nations are before him. And it's a picture of judgment and power and authority. And that is Jesus. He has all of that. But he says, even the Son of Man, even the one who has all this authority, all this power and dominion, he didn't come to be served. He didn't come that we would serve him. He didn't come to stand out so that everybody would serve him. But he came to serve. He came to give his life. He came to wash feet. He came to serve and heal. And the passage that our D group I'm in that we're going through, it was last week or the week before, it said, and everyone who touched the hem of his garment was healed. Everyone whoever touched him, just immediately healed. That's why he came, to serve, to heal, to forgive. He didn't come to be served. He came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, the word for ransom just means a payment. A payment had to be made. because it's often was used in the context of slavery, that someone would pay for the release of this slave. And so Jesus comes, and he didn't have to pay Satan. He didn't owe Satan anything. That was something that came up in the early church. But he came to pay something that we could never have paid on our own. If someone walked in here this morning, it's a much lower, simple example. But if someone came up to you and said, hey, I want to pay off your house mortgage for you. Okay, whatever it is you owe, $200,000, $300,000, whatever, however much, that would be life-changing for you, would it not? Especially if you're young. That would change the rest of your financial life. I mean, that would change your monthly budget. That would change your insurance. I mean, everything. I mean, that would be a radical, but it's something you could never do on your own. And on a much greater level, Jesus came to do something we could never have done. He came as the Son of God, the Son of Man, fully God, fully man, to pay a debt we never could have paid. And he came to give, notice, for, the word for is in place of, or as a substitute. Jesus is not just our example, he's our substitute. He died in our place. He hung on the cross in our place. He died a death for us. Notice now he says who he does it for. For many. For many. Now, there are some who will say, okay, this is only a select few. And some of you probably, you may interpret it that way. And the other way is, no, he died for all. And the word many is, in Semitic languages, it can be used as a synonym for all. Let me give you an example of that. In Romans chapter 5, in verse 15, it says this, but the free gift is not like the trespass. That is, salvation is not like sin. For if many died through one man's trespass, he's talking about Adam's sin. Now let me ask you a question. Were all considered guilty after Adam sinned? Yes, that's what Romans 3 taught us. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So he's saying, for if many died through one man's trespass, that is all, so many there means all. It's a synonym for all, because all have died and become guilty of sin after Adam and Eve. So many, I interpret many in John 10:45 as all. Jesus came and gave his life as a ransom for all, to pay the penalty for everyone, no matter who you are. Way before we even were created, Jesus paid for our sin. Now, here's the reality about significance. You already are significant. God loved you so much that he would send Jesus before you were even created to pay for your sin. So you already are significant. You mattered enough to Jesus that he would willingly lay down his life. Jesus said, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down willingly. So you already are significant. You already matter to him. So we don't have to try to get involved in the worldly treadmill of, I've got to find it, I've got to push, I've got to find success. You already are significant. You already matter. But Jesus says, hey, some of you may still want greatness and all that in life, so just go serve somebody. Just go serve. Just go wait on them. Go just consider yourself a slave. Go take the last place. All right, let me give you just a few quick application points, and it's based on just the acronym ACT, okay? So first, avoid self-promotion. That's easy to say, but hard to do. Avoid self-promotion, because it is everywhere. It's in the church, it's in social media, it's in the world, it's everywhere. Avoid self-promotion. Our flesh yearns to be promoted. We yearn to be seen and valued and all of those things. In Jeremiah 45, the prophet wrote this man named Baruch. And he writes Baruch, and he's consoling him. Baruch is apparently upset because the Babylonians are coming, and they're going to defeat Jerusalem and carry a bunch of them back to Babylon. But Baruch, his grandfather, had been the ruler of Jerusalem. And his brother had a high position of authority under King Zedekiah. So apparently Baruch thought, hey, one day my time's coming. I'm going to have a position. I'm going to be important. I'm going to be significant. And Jeremiah consoles him because Baruch now has to know it's not going to happen because the Babylonians are coming. So Jeremiah writes him, and this is what he says. And do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not. Baruch, are you seeking something for yourself? Don't do it. Seek them not. I think the King James Version says, seekest thou great things for yourself? Seek them not. We don't have to self-promote in order for God's plan to take place. Next is consider others more important. Just real simple. Who can you serve today? If you're married, it starts with your spouse. If you're single, it starts with a roommate or a close friend. Who's someone you can serve today? If you're going to the store after this, take the last parking spot. Just simple things. Just who can I serve? Who can I say, hey, you're more important than I am? Because when we do that, well, you're saying, I don't have to be right, and I don't have to be first, but your needs are more important than mine. And finally, on that, there's a quote by Dr. Danny Aiken. He said, in the world, the more powerful you are, the more people serve you. In his world, the more important you are, the more people you serve. Finally, totally surrender your life to Jesus as your master. For some of you, that will mean salvation. You may have wondered, man, but how could I be saved? There's all this sin in my life. I was talking with someone after the first service, and she just got back from Rome, and she was saying this is a Jubilee year. So the place is packed with, if you've seen any of Pastor and those pictures online, you see how many people are just crowded into these places, these Vatican and all of these places that they're going. She said it's Jubilee year, so the place is crowded like crazy because the thought is if I go there, I'll be absolved of my sins. It's something that I have to do. I've got to work. And Jesus has already paid it all. And that's maybe some of you, that next step is, I just need to receive that. Jesus is offering the free gift, and you just need to receive it. You don't have to work for it. Just receive it. Others of you, maybe you've said, I've made that decision. But I've been involved in just on this treadmill of trying to find significance. And you just need to walk away from that and give it up and say, Jesus, I'm just going to serve people. Teach me how to serve like you did. There's a lady named Cheryl Bachelder. Cheryl lost her job early in the early 2000s. Very sharp young lady, very well-educated, MBA degree from Indiana University, very successful. She worked at Domino's Pizza, then got a job at Kentucky Fried Chicken. But things just didn't go well for her at Kentucky Fried Chicken, and she lost her job. And as she looked back, she really realized that she had bought into this worldly method of leadership. She enjoyed the spotlight, and she would take it, and it just didn't go well. So she stayed at home for a few years, took care of her family, and thankfully another opportunity came along for her. In 2007, she was asked by the board of Popeyes to be the CEO of Popeyes. So she took the job, and she decided from day one, I'm going to serve people. I'm not going to make this about me. She even used the image of a stage. If you're going to watch a Broadway play and the spotlight comes on, and she was like, what if the actor or the lead actress didn't step into that spotlight, but instead went around the room helping everybody else, helping the camera person, the light person, and the music person, all of these people. So she decided that's how I'm going to lead. I'm no longer taking the spotlight. I'm going to serve other people. But the question was, how is this going to work out in a corporate context, especially a big company like Popeyes? So she got her leadership team, and they were meeting and trying to decide, who are we going to serve? Is it the customer? Is it the franchise owner? Is it the supplier? Who is it that we're going to serve? And they decided that day, we're going to serve the franchise owner. The franchise owner, in their estimation, really is the heart of Popeyes. They're the ones who sacrifice and borrow money and build these buildings, and they're the ones who serve the customer. They're the front line. So we're going to serve the franchise owner. And there was all this tension in that moment, in those days, between the franchise owners and corporate, and just lack of respect, and, well, they don't understand us, and they don't support us, and just back and forth, back and forth. And a lot of them didn't even like the franchise owners. But they said, we're going to serve them, and we're not just going to serve them, we're going to love them. They made the conscious decision, we're going to love these people. Whatever they need, if we can even do it, we're going to provide it. Training, support, whatever. Well, that theory was tested early. In a meeting with some franchise owners, Cheryl and her leadership team, they were talking about advertising. And the way they did advertising in that time was every local restaurant, every franchise owner would pay 3 or 4% of their budget to pay for local advertising. And it would only go locally, and that's understandable. But Cheryl came along and said, hey, we want to change that strategy. We want it to go national. We're going to reach twice as many people. But here's the catch. It's going to cost $12 million. And the only people who paid for it were the franchise owners. Corporate didn't pay a dime to help with advertising. So Cheryl said, we have this new strategy. You're going to pay for it. And so the franchise owners say, hey, can we talk about this a little bit? So Cheryl and her team left, and Cheryl's going, I don't know how this is going. Let me come up with plan B. And they came back together, and the franchise owner said, you know what? We like your idea, but there's a catch. We want you to pay $6 million. In other words, we want you to pay 50%. We like your idea. Since you think it's such a good idea, why don't you pay 50%? And Cheryl said, okay, let me think about it. So she went to her board and argued and lobbied for the idea and said, hey, we're going to serve these people. We're going to love these people. We got to be all in. And the board said, okay, let's do it. That was the turning point. For the next 8 straight years, positive growth, positive growth, positive growth. Restaurant sales on average went up 45%. In 2007, when Cheryl took over, the stock market value price per share, $13 a share. The end of 2008 or 16, $61 per share, up nearly 500%. Cheryl decided we're going to serve them and we're going to love them, and it paid off. She learned to live upside down. Will you? Let's stand. Let's pray about it.